Hey everyone, David here, and I've got some exciting news to share. I've decided to write a book, and I've entitled it Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. The book is intended to help clarify the fact that psychological safety cannot be achieved without paying attention to the psychosocial hazards people are being exposed to. Despite how much individuals might be interested in treating others with kindness, dignity, and respect, many cultures are so full of psychosocial traps that no psychological health and safety effort can ultimately succeed. But to address psychosocial hazards, you first have to know what they are, and you have to have some idea what to do to address them. Though the book won't be 100% complete until the spring of 2025, I'd like to share a unique opportunity to reserve a copy during the book presale campaign. The campaign will run from September 16th to October 18th, 2024. This will be an opportunity to get one of the first copies of the book, tickets to the book launch event, and other opportunities to learn more about psychosocial hazards. For more information, you can go to my personal LinkedIn or Facebook page, or the LinkedIn, Facebook, or webpage for ID2 Solutions. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Now, back to this episode of the podcast.
Trauma is an inevitable part of the human experience. Everyone encounters challenges or difficult moments at some point in their lives. Recognizing the impact of trauma is one of the steps to recovery. We'll talk about trauma-informed approaches to psychological health and safety up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Being trauma-informed means recognizing the widespread impact of trauma and understanding potential paths to recovery. It means recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma in others, integrating this knowledge into practices, and striving to avoid re-traumatization. It's about creating a supportive environment where people feel safe and respected and to promote healing. The fundamental principles of trauma-informed approaches to psychological health and safety include ensuring physical and emotional safety for everyone involved, building trust, encouraging mutual support and shared experiences, promoting teamwork and equal participation in decision-making, empowering individuals by giving them voice and a choice in their care, recognizing and addressing the impact of cultural, historical, and gender issues as it relates to trauma. So we're going to get into that topic today with someone who's been hanging out in the space of trauma-informed practice for a while. And we're going to get right to it with an introduction of my guest, by my guest, with this question. Who is Treena Reilkoff?
Thank you for the invite to this, David. And Treena Reilkoff is a trauma-informed conflict risk mitigation consultant, assessor, workplace restoration, coach, investigator, who loves to learn.
Tell me more.
Well, I'm a lifelong learner. So where I am today and my business of TLR Solutions for Conflict is based on a history of my personal and professional roles, experiences, and learning that all align in my mind, they all connect under one umbrella, which is what trauma informed and psychological health and safety is.
Okay. Okay. We're gonna peel back the layers of that description of who you are after I ask you one more question though. What does psychological health and safety mean to you?
Well, that one, it means something personally, and it actually means something in my heart and soul, and why I believe in it, and why I'm invested in the business and working and helping create psychologically health and safe workplaces. When I was a clinical social worker, so up here in Canada where I am, I've lived in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and now Ontario. So 5 provinces, not going further east. But when I lived in BC on the island of Vancouver Island, I worked as a clinical social worker at the hospital mental health intake. Also did crisis intervention at night. So as a clinical social worker, mental health intake in a hospital, we did differential biopsychosocial assessments, did the diagnosis, would do a medication review and recommendation, and then you would go consult with the psychologist or psychiatrist. So when we look at what is psychological health and safety, it is that psychosocial assessment. We're taking out the biological component of the human, and we're introducing and integrating the assessments of the social environmental contexts and the workplace systems, processes, policies, legislations that influence our mental psychological well-being.
Wow. So you were right in the middle of, and again, a little reminder for folks who don't drop by all that often, or folks who may drop by all that often, they may notice that I generally focus on guests who are from the United States, but I'm finding that we have some limitations down here. Some of the limitations are the fact we've got some, really smart people, folks doing a lot of research on psychology and, occupational health and safety, and but on the psychological health and safety map, we're not quite there yet. And I'm finding that it's necessary every now and then to go to places where this conversation is not a new one. It's a really new one here. As a matter of fact, the book that I've been working on for a while, the title is "Psychosocial Hazards Are Real" because it's written for folks who don't even know that this is a problem. We don't recognize it's an issue, therefore don't recognize that there's risk, therefore have normalized some of the things that happen, and frankly just don't do anything about it. And so the important thing about having a conversation with you is that you've been in and around this for a while. And again, we've conversed a couple of times, met in person, at the conference last year, or earlier. Well, actually, it is about not last year now, as the episode is coming out. It's in a previous year, but anyway, I didn't realize that you actually had background in the environment where really traumatized people are. And I should say this, um, we're all traumatized. We all are. The difference is some people have been diagnosed and are in facilities where we know how significant their trauma is. The issue is really for all the rest of us who are out kind of hanging out with other people, and we act as if everything's fine for us. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. So, is there a particular situation, circumstance, or set of things that caused you, because that experience could have caused you to go all kinds of different ways? Um, is there something that really motivated you to learn more about psychological health and safety specifically, as opposed to, well, I want to be a psychiatrist, I want to be a pharmacist, or is there a particular incident that or situation that caused you to go this route?
There's a few, but it's like A plus B equals C or goes to C. It's looking at my past experiences where my ex was military, so I've grown up as an adult in a military environment, married into a military environment. My kids were raised in military environment. I have worked as a veteran affairs case manager, so worked with not only active military members, but also retired and medically released, where understanding that impact of the work and what you were exposed to changes who you are. And then when you come out, how do you understand and use those past experiences that might be barriers to moving forward or getting a new profession? What does that really look like or feel like? So, how has that past exposure to trauma experiences or critical incidents changed who you are and how you're able to cope? Recognizing there's no right or wrong because we're human. So, when COVID hit and where I was living in Ontario, I called it on house arrest. You are not allowed to leave your house unless you were going for groceries or a medical appointment. So, if you did not have a backyard, you were not allowed to go for walks at the beginning. So that change in environment and being on house arrest, being stuck in your home, and if you were isolated, that mentally impacted you. If you were living in a domestic violence environment, that would have impacted and put people at risk. That's trauma. So COVID was a trauma, worldwide trauma that what else do you do when everybody's stuck at home? And I'm a lifelong learner. Seeing that psychological health and safety came out, and I got my training initially in 2018 through Canadian Mental Health Association on psychological health and safety, assessing it, and workplace restoration through the Fairness Institute here. But what kind of led me to, again, what is psychological health and safety is that belief in resiliency as well. So for me, resiliency, it's not just that personal resiliency, get over something and bounce back. Resiliency is personal, professional, organizational, operational, financial, and environmental. And we don't want to just bounce back. We want to bounce further and flourish and take that experience and have it as an asset, a tool for the next time, because life, there's always a next time. And when we look at the trauma-informed and how you said, the experiences, people will have different experiences, but how you react is all individual, and it's based on your life experiences, your cultural experiences, intergenerational and historical trauma. But how the simple version of understanding it is when I do my trauma-informed workshops, and you're looking at psychological health and safety and occupational health and safety. We're here in Canada. Psychological health and safety is now integrated into our labor code, occupational health and safety. So you have to risk assess yearly in your workplace for psychosocial hazards, not just physical ones. So what would that look like that everybody can understand it? We know ice, and I'm up here in Canada. There's no snow where I am right now, but where I used to live in Manitoba, it's a full-out blizzard and highways are closed. So the hazard is ice. If there's going to be snow, sleet, you got your business, you want to make sure the risk of slip and fall does not incur at your front door. So to mitigate that risk, you do sand, salt, signs, a different entrance, chip it away, but you got to mitigate that risk because the potential for injury is nothing if they fall and you're okay. It could be a bruise, it could be a broken limb, but depending on how somebody falls, it could be death, right? So it is that severe end. So when we're looking at psychological health and safety and what are the hazards and risks, workload is considered a hazard in Canada under labor code. So if the hazard is workload, the risk of not having proper people, if there's too much work and that's the hazard, the risks are, coping, work-life balance. It could then progress to stress. It then can progress to burnout. It could then progress to psychological injury or harm and diagnoses because of, you're not keeping up to date. You're getting bullied. You're getting harassed in the workplace. But ultimately, just like a slip and fall might result in death, workload can result in death, and that's called suicide. And right now, the suicide rate of the legal profession and in lawyers and in firefighters is increasing, and first responders, because it's unique environments where workload was never considered a hazard before.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think if at least the last data that I read, and again, I don't have this, 100% exact, but I seem to recall that the global suicide rate is somewhere around 10 people per 100,000 thereabouts. And in the United States, for example, we hover about 14. But there are occupations that are in the 20s and 30s. And it is, and so again, a lot of this, again, to your point, I love the way you made the connection between physical hazards. And again, I argue at this stage in my occupational safety and health career that there are two kinds of hazards: physical ones and psychosocial ones. Because most of the ones that we talk about, they're all physical. Wind is physical, heat is physical, chemicals are physical. They are things that we can see, hear, touch, taste. We can sense all of them, but we can't feel all of them until they impact us. And a psychosocial hazard, at least the definition in my research is a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person who's exposed to it as a threat that causes them to behave differently. Not just it's a threat, because threats are everywhere. And but when the threat is such that I alter my behavior, it was so serious to me that I had to do something different to protect myself. Those are the things we should pay attention to. A psychosocial hazard is not something that you can put your arms around, but it's something you can definitely feel. And I think that's particularly a challenge, the way, particularly the way we're socialized from a gender perspective. So men, those who gender identify as male, are often taught that you have to be strong and don't worry about those feelings and push through your feelings and all that type of thing. But feelings are a part of how human beings function. And that whole idea that you're supposed to push past your feelings, I don't necessarily subscribe to it anymore. I just don't, because I can't function with it. My feelings are there to tell me something. It's a piece of information that's telling me something. And I think we need to pay attention to, because the things that I can feel and can't see, if I address those feelings, I might not have to deal with the physical thing anyway. It's a kind of a warning sign. And I just think too many people blow past it, don't worry about it. And then when the physical thing shows up, the physical consequence shows up, it's really bad. And it didn't really have to be that bad.
And that kind of ties into what is trauma informed. Trauma is an invisible wound. It's that exposure to a critical incident, event, near life threatening, or it could be historical unresolved conflict, intergenerational, cultural issues. And it's not physical. It develops into physical when your mind can no longer cope. But it's looking at that trauma informed is that fire alarm. It's our amygdala. We have a trauma response, right? So you can have that physical bruise, but exposure to a near death experience or a threatening event, you're going to experience a fight, flight, or freeze, which are the trauma responses. And many people don't know it's not the incident, it's how your body coped and how your body has memory. And so whether you call it a trauma response because that's a past incident and you've been triggered, or a stress response, which is a present, current moment, how you react of potential fight, flight, or freeze mirror each other. So that's why becoming trauma informed is so valuable, important, and it's a universal precaution, and it's a strategy in creating psychological health and safe workplaces, because you don't know when that incident's going to occur or a past incident's going to trigger you, and somebody or yourself is experiencing a fight, flight, freeze response. And how do you get out of it? So you're not stuck and you're in your present time, because when you're in that response, you're not present to where you are, which could be a risk in the job you're doing, in decision making. So, and you mentioned something interesting too about how we always practice, prepare for the physical risks and mitigating them. And it was a discussion we had a while ago, but it was looking at, we practice fire drills. Schools practice threat coming into the school, or, weapons in school. More and more guns are coming into the school. So we practice those responses of a threat and how do you get out of the building to stay physically safe. But why aren't we practicing how to stay mentally safe after we've gotten physically out there safe? Because mentally, emotionally, we're still potentially in that threat response. And then we go into the what if. So we have to start shifting how we look at creating and mitigating risk and responses to threats, disruption, volatile situations, life experiences, but not just physically, but mentally, psychologically.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
Yeah, I there's a part of me that thinks we've just kind of gone about it backwards. We've gone about it backwards because we focus so much on the physical manifestation of whatever. But an example is when people get injured at work, and I've done injury investigations and fatality investigations myself, but what I observe is when something happens, so Joe, runs into the back of is driving and runs into the back of of a vehicle or runs into something. The first thing, and in a lot of places, the first thing they do is they want to drug test the person, which is a whole nother conversation for another day. But we try to figure out were the brakes working? Was he following the traffic rules? Was he driving too fast? Did the person in front brake too fast? There's all these kind of physical things. And then typically when we find the culprit is the human being. We go, well, it's them. They were driving too fast. And what we don't tend to investigate is why were they driving so fast? Why were they not paying attention to what was going on in front of them? Why did the maintenance check that was supposed to have been done on the vehicle not get done? Why did we not provide the person the training they were supposed to have? Why did they not have a job description? Why did they have so many things on their list of deliveries today? So we don't dig into those things, and those, in many cases, are the hazards. It's not their driving that was a hazard. It was the fact that they were sent out with 55 packages to deliver in the next 2 hours. That it is something that is in some cases close to impossible. And then we'll say, well, we gave Treena some stuff to do and we incentivized her. If she delivered more, we'd pay her more. So then you incentivized me to drive faster, but then when I drive fast and hit something, I'm in trouble? You see what I mean? So we don't, as a system, spend enough time trying to figure out not only why this thing happened physically, but what was going on psychologically and emotionally for the person just before this significant thing happened. And I'll say this other, that some of these psychosocial hazards are blinking. They're just like kind of like the fire alarm. Who is going to do a good job in an environment where they're exposed to bullying and harassment and people screaming at them and throwing things at them and physical altercation? Violence at work? How are they possibly going to do a great job when they're in that kind of environment? And we all know it. We know what's going on, but no one will do anything about it. So again, that the app description that you made, this connection between, there's these physical things going on that we're putting a lot of energy into, but we should also be putting energy into figure out how does this thing cause people to feel when we do it?
Yeah, and you said a key point. It's like people are seeing it, but nobody's saying anything or doing anything. But why? Because there's that threat. There's that fear response of potential retaliation, retribution. You're going to lose your job. So the threat response of fight, flight, or freeze is enacted when we even witness it. So what is freeze? Freeze is not responding, is pretending it didn't happen. Or flight is ignoring it and turning the other way and walking away, pretending you didn't see anything. So we don't realize that when we're confronted, and it doesn't necessarily have to be directly to us, the harassment, the bullying, the discrimination, the overworkloads, but when we're witnessing it too, we're being vicariously traumatized because it can happen to you because you're seeing it happen to a peer in the workplace. So what means it can't happen to you? And, nobody stays at their same job, career, or company anymore. People grow, you change. The world is very dynamic and fluid. So somebody's prior history of being exposed to workplace violence, harassment, discrimination, it occurred. So if they go into a new workplace, and it's great, they're loving their job, everybody's great, and then they witness something, and then all of a sudden they have that response. And all of a sudden they got to leave. They feel sick, or they have a panic attack, or, they start tearing up, or all of a sudden they start getting angry. A lot of the time, people with prior diagnoses related to workplace violence or harassment and bullying, sometimes they present as disrespectful or aggressive, but that's their fight response happening because the environment created has caused that threat. And to become trauma informed is not becoming necessarily trauma informed so you can identify other people. It's a safety net for yourself, because how are you supposed to help and support others if you don't know your own trauma responses, your own stress responses, and know how to mitigate and get out of them right away?
Yeah, I was chatting with somebody recently, and I talked about the fact that in life it's as if we have a suitcase or a backpack or a duffel or whatever it is, and we're carrying things in that piece of luggage. Sometimes we don't know. We've never opened it up to find out what they really are. We know it's heavy, but we really don't know what's in it. So we can't even unpack it. We just drag it from place to place. And another thing that you mentioned that's really important is this idea. We were told, I believe when I was coming up that, the most successful people are those who get to a job, and they stay there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And that says that they're quote unquote successful. The average person, according to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, is going to stay on their job in so last information is available for 2023, 3.6 years. That's how long they're going to be on their job. That's down from 4.1 the year before. As a matter of fact, I haven't found data and I looked as far back as 1963, and it's never been higher than about 5.1 years, ever. So the average person in the United States is going to change jobs about every 5 years or less. But we've been told that somehow they're job hopping. They're not successful. That is most people. And we build businesses and organizations looking for all this experience at the other place. Nobody has it. They've only been there about 5 years. I wonder, I'm off on a tangent here, but why in the world do we even do references on the human being, but we don't check out the other business? So Treena has been in 5 jobs in the last, 15 years. Well, did you check to find out what was going on at that business when she was there? Perhaps it wasn't safe for her. Perhaps she was being mistreated there. Perhaps she had a traumatic experience and she had to leave for her own mental health. But again, to your point about being trauma informed, we should assume that everyone has had some trauma in their lifetime, because we all have.
Yeah, and if you look at it too, I can't remember where the article was that I just read, but it was saying about how like all the new hires, all of them, they're getting fired. They're not producing the outcomes that are expected. They're, not showing up on time or not dressing appropriately. All these reasons, and they're getting fired. Has everybody forgotten COVID was a worldwide trauma? Those generation right now that came up lost 2 to 3 years of developmental growth in social, emotional, cognitive growth in how to address stress, in how to address conflict, of how to interact in the business world. They were at home online doing school. So they come out now, and the expectation, and recognizing, there was an article today I read on LinkedIn, we're at a state right now of 5 generations. Ageism. So take ageism and the impact of COVID that has stunted developmental growth for this generation. It's only now, right now, and this is my personal just belief, feeling, and the legacy I want to leave of why I value what resiliency is, pre-resilience of how to be prepared beforehand, psychological health and safety, is that we know trauma sits on our epigenetics, and it is passed down through 7 generations. And you can be triggered by something and you might not even know why, because it's intergenerational. So if trauma can sit on our epigenetics, that means our resilient traits can, and our intergenerational resilient traits can. And now is the time. This is the only time in life right now is where we need to create that intergenerational trauma and conflict resiliency for our next future generations, because they're not going to have it if we don't do it now.
Wow. Wow. So when you just mentioned that, you said that this trauma can be passed down 7 generations. A bit of a side story. Last year, I had the opportunity with my mom and one of my cousins to go to a family reunion, and the family reunion is based on folks that I'm related to through my great great grandparents, and these are folks I'd never met before. But the interesting thing is that my great 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 grandparents were slaves. And so that's only 6 generations. There's another after that and that's just one example, but we have folks whose as a matter of fact, I know folks whose parents survived the Holocaust. I know folks whose grandparents, fought in World War I know folks and just pick some. I almost got it. My great grandparents almost got on the Titanic. Pick your situation. But the world is a very, very hostile place to human beings sometimes, and a lot of things have happened. And if you're saying 7 generations, that, again, everybody has something. But we've built these systems to say, oh, it's all great. It's all perfect. We can all just kind of show up and smile every day because it's perfect every day. Well, it's not.
And you know what? Why are we afraid to say it's not? Why are we afraid not to embrace conflict and become conflict curious rather than conflict avoidant? Why are we afraid to fail? Because fail is how you learn. Fail fast, fail often, because that's how we learn if you don't fail. So when we look at trauma-informed and take it as a universal precaution, you're learning more and integrating basically how to mitigate psychosocial risks and hazards in your workplace, in your life skill.
Right. Again, another something that you've mentioned a couple of times that want to point out for people who aren't picking up on it. So you talk about using trauma-informed practices as a universal precaution. The other place that some folks may have heard of universal precautions is in first aid. Universal precaution is glove up. Even if you don't know what's going on, you glove up. So I think what I'm hearing you saying is, from a psychological health and safety perspective, a universal precaution is to assume that the person has been traumatized at some point.
Right. And if we have time, I can share a example that I use in my training that helps people understand a trauma response. Is so when I used to work in veteran affairs, we did vocational rehab. And so when I was married, I lived in Cold Lake, Alberta. So it's a base and then towns around it, cities around it. But every year they had Maple Flag. And Maple Flag, 5 weeks straight, you had the top fighter pilots of the world come and practice every day. So it was an air show right there, and you could go right on the base, cross the street from the tarmac, and you could feel the heat from the engines. You saw the fire. You could see the eyes of the pilots, and it was better than coffee. And I would take my kids every morning to watch the jets take off before taking them to school. So when I hear an F-18 or a fighter jet going by, and no matter where I am in the world, if I hear it, I start getting goosebumps. I start getting a big smile. My heart starts racing faster, and I'm having good memories because it is a happy, that sound just fills my heart with joy. Great memories. Now imagine that we have a veteran who is transitioning. They've transitioned out of, active military duty, whether they retired or they were forced to retire due to medical conditions. And now they're going to go into a job interview. So they're downtown Toronto and they're walking into the office. They're pumped. They're prepared for this job interview. They've got the transferable skills. It's a C-suite, high-level position because maybe they're a retired colonel. And they're going in, and then all of a sudden, they were in Afghanistan. They've had 3 deployments. And maybe they were also the fighter pilot as well. And so they're going in to do their job interview. And as they're opening the door to the main office, they all of a sudden hear the sound of jets flying over. And in that millisecond, them hearing those jets triggers them to go into their past memories of the war, of shooting down people, killing people. They're the pilot. They're not in a present state. They are now having flashbacks. And depending on what their response is, fight, flight, or freeze, their heart rate's up, their blood pressure's up. They cannot think or decision make because they are visually in their mind reliving an event. So then they walk in and they look like a deer in headlights when they're introducing to the panel of who's going to interview them, and everybody's looking at them and they know something's off, but they're not sure. And they heard the jets, but nobody's connecting. Hey, you're a veteran. Have you ever been deployed? What are your experiences? Hey, there's a air show going on. Did you know about it? So that's why now here in Canada, and you take that same scenario and you look at the immigrants that are coming over from war-torn countries. And I remember living in Cold Lake as well. When the planes would go over, my neighbor, his friends went back to Iran to go see family. And when they came back and the jets were practicing, I remember the little boy, he was 6 years old, and he'd hear the jets in the morning and he'd grab his knapsack and he'd run underneath down to the basement under the stairs. Because to him, that means bombs were dropping. I can die. Right? So that's why now here in Canada, across Canada, when there is air shows, to respect and give trauma trigger warnings before events, they advertise the air shows. The newspaper, the radio, they say, you know what? Trigger warning, be prepared. It's like saying, it's New Year's Eve and firecrackers are going off. Fireworks, that is not always a happy experience, hearing that loud bang for people. And it creates a trauma response. So when we look at becoming trauma-informed, it's trauma shows up as a memory and it's shown as a behavior. And it can happen anywhere, at any time, at any place, to anyone, because nobody's immune from it.
Wow. Yeah, that is just really impactful when you think about all these different kinds of things that could have happened to folks over the course of their life. I mean, I was just sitting here thinking that the students at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, are in their late 30s and early 40s now, and they're all over the country, and there are all types of other young people who have grown up with not only experiencing these school shootings themselves, but hearing about them and seeing them on television, and so they're out doing whatever, and something falls and hits the floor. It may not be a gunshot, but it has that sound. It may be fireworks. It could be anything. But again, to your point, it brings up, the trauma that they've been exposed to before, and it causes them to behave in a way that, people might think that's odd, but it isn't for them. It is their fight, flight, or freeze response to the trauma that they've been exposed to. And the thing that I think is most important is not that people get all wrapped up trying to figure out other people's trauma. That's not the point. That's not the point. Well, what was going on and what was happening, and can we get back and get all their history? And that really isn't important. What's important is how does the environment that they're in respond when they have their response? How do you respond?
And that's where it goes back to that workplace environment and psychosocial risks and hazards. People want to work, people want to show up and be their best and do their best, but they can't if the work environment is not allowing them to. And if there's risks and hazards of workplace violence, harassment, work overload, incivility, disrespect, breakdown in communication, right? We're human. So it's looking at it in a lens of a holistic, of not fluffy, soft. It's in risk mitigation. We're mitigating risk, and if you don't mitigate the risk in the workplace and include trauma-informed practices into your policies, frameworks, everyday work life, it potentially can cost you in time, money, human sustainability, potential grievances, workplace violence, harassment complaints, litigation, or reputational loss because you're front page of what happened at your workplace or organization because you did not identify that risk or mitigate it, and somebody was potentially re-traumatized.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I often hear folks talk about the fact that psychological health and safety, an environment where that exists, doesn't mean that you don't have conversations about issues and challenges and low performance and all that type of thing. But again, my and I mention this because I want folks to know that I have the credibility to be able to say it. I have a master's degree in HR, and I can tell you that a lot of organizations that talk about performance don't have a performance management system that's worth a penny. People don't have job descriptions. There isn't consistent feedback. The work is not balanced. The work is, frankly, it's not even what they were hired to do. So I hire you to do X, I expect you to do Y, and then I don't give you any feedback. And as soon as it doesn't go the way I expect it's supposed to go, now there's discipline and now there's suspensions and terminations and all these other kinds of things. That's not that doesn't make any sense to begin with. And it's definitely not psychologically safe for anybody. It just really isn't. It's a system issue. And I'm not suggesting that the people who do these things are bad people either. They aren't necessarily bad people. It is a system itself that says it's okay to hire people and not give them a job description, or to add that little clause at the end that says other duties to be assigned later. I don't want a description that says other duties to be assigned later. I want, what are my duties? And I want to be evaluated on that. Because that's what you pay me, is to do that thing. If you want to give me the latitude to do it however I want, then we don't have a problem.
But and then it's looking at too, you got your job duties, here's your job description, and now you're going to do some training. And everybody thinks when you get education, you're trained. Education is not skill development, performance competencies. So I kind of like to, again, within the trauma informed and mitigating risk and identifying conflict, it's like looking at it, is it a barrier, obstacle, or a challenge? Say I'm going to climb Mount Everest. I need to train. I need to go buy the proper equipment. I need to map it out. I need to get a coach. I need a lot of things to be successful. So I have a skill deficit and a performance deficit. If you look at obstacles, like you're running the obstacle course, you can go above it or under it or around it two different ways. That means I have the skills, but sometimes there's that performance deficit. People lack that ability to transfer the skill sets into the environmental context you need and look for. And that's where the role modeling, coaching, do you understand styles of communication? Because learning styles are different. Neurodivergent. We're now learning neurodivergent means a different brain. It doesn't mean that you have a disability and like you're missing a limb. It means you process information differently. When you're looking at challenge, that's where policy, process, systems, written material, right? You go to lawyers, you go to court. The law is there. You gather the evidence. You present the case best to see who's going to win in the evidence, how you present it to match what your interpretation of the law is. Right? So how we perceive and understand policy, process, systems, frameworks is individually based. And do we take time to say, are we all on the same page, and how are you communicating? And then when you look at trauma, exposure to trauma, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, it changes your brain. So how you used to present before and then a traumatic incident happens, say you got robbed at work, say you were in a serious car accident while working, and now you have a traumatic brain injury. Your brain has changed, and you have changed in how you process, so your behaviors will be different. But does anybody ever take time to look and say, hey, I expect you to be who you were prior to this critical incident, before this car accident, before the harassment, bullying, before, right? We're human, so being quick to be negative, judgmental, and not taking time to be curious is what we need to do to embrace psychological health and safety and trauma-informed. And I think you mentioned something else too, and I'd love to hear your explanation of it, because a lot of people do not understand the definition of what is psychological safety. Amy Edmondson, psychological safety, versus psychological health and safety, risk mitigation, hazards, occupational health and safety.
I think we have a lot of, and again, this is another situation I certainly see here in the States is I love Dr. Edmondson's work. I think it's important. I think that it is a worthy and worthwhile endeavor to create an environment where people feel that they can be themselves and not have to worry about, being mistreated or being looked frowned upon because they have a different point of view. I mean, that's kind of the essence of psychological safety. It's a team related thing. We can do this. We're okay to be ourselves, so on and so forth. The issue is, to me though, is that psychological health and safety, the process creates psychological safety eventually if it's done right. And you can't, I'll put it this way. You can actually have psychological safety temporarily and accidentally. You get it temporarily because if you put the right people together who just happen to know each other and they're all the same, of course it's psychologically safe for them. As soon as you insert someone who sees it different, who has a different point of view, who has a different view of the world, then they may not be as psychologically safe as everybody else. And I tie all of this together. The reason, or one of the major reasons that they lose their psychological safety is that they are exposed to a psychosocial hazard. And all of these things are unique to us as individuals. And I heard somebody say this years ago, and I keep repeating it. Different does not mean it's deficient. And we have a lot of ways of describing different things as somehow less than, better than, good, or, this is good. This is the standard is up here and you come in here. It's just different. That's all. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with it. It means that it is different from the standard that we put in place for this particular job. But often when I create something, I create it in my own image. And I do it the way that works for me. Everything I do for me is safe for me. That's it. But it's just not safe for everybody else. I can't assume that because it works for me, it works for you. And it doesn't make my way bad or your way bad. It just makes them different.
And that's where being trauma-informed allows acceptance of difference, because now you're understanding not only the neurology of trauma and what happens in the brain, but now you're understanding the somatic, the behavioral of what the body does, right? So it's not only the heart racing and the sweating, teeth clenched, but it's also looking at how we react, how we show up, the behaviors of fight, flight, and freeze. They're different. They're not right or wrong. We're human, and we all have a unique lived experience and intergenerational and historical stories.
Absolutely. Oh boy. Well, as we conclude our conversation, because we could talk about this for hours, you really could. I just don't. I don't know if people would watch or listen for that long, but we'd have a good day. It'd be great for us. So if folks have been watching or listening and really want to learn more about trauma-informed practices, they want to learn more about the kind of work that you do, how would they find out more if they want to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Just put my name in, Treena Reilkoff, or TLR Solutions for Conflict, or Google TLR Solutions for Conflict.ca or .com. I can't recall. You do TLR Solutions for Conflict, it will pop up. And if the page has nice bright yellow daffodils, I was going to say dandelions. I'm thinking Manitoba right now, but it's bright and yellow, and it's yellow just because yellow makes me happy. And when you're talking tough subjects and trauma and not nice feelings, simple things of sensory, yellow, simple things that make you smile and happy do have a profound effect on your emotions, your behavior, your cognitions, how you show up.
Right. Well, Treena, thank you so much for spending some time with me chatting about a topic that can be kind of heavy. But you don't make it so heavy.
That's another topic.
And I think it's important to, well, I think that's important because, the trauma in and of itself can be challenging for us. It is. It can be challenging for us. But on the other hand, if we are trauma informed, we recognize that our experience is not unique. Other folks have had other things that have traumatized them as well. And again, as I was sharing before, if we can get in touch with that and know that, that was a traumatic situation, but I recognize it. I have a sense about what can and does trigger me. And I try to, make sure that I don't put myself in those situations. And if I do, I have a response. I have a way to
manage it.
Yeah,
manage
I have a plan.
And cope.
To be able to manage
and kind of how I like to look at it, life's going to happen. You're going to come with a conflict, trauma, adversity, crisis, and it's going to impact you somehow. But if you know yourself and learn more about yourself, you can mitigate the risk of it negatively impacting your psychology, your mental health, and your physical well-being. And then take that learning and use it as assets for the next time to prepare you, and it's in your back pocket so you know how to respond. So you kind of leave it with, you increase your situational awareness. So I can say, when I go out and I walk in the dark or I go hiking in the bush, I've been stalked twice by humans and once by a cougar, but has it ever stopped me from going out or hiking deep in the bushes or going out at night? No. Am I more prepared? Yes.
Yes. Wow. Well, with that, thanks so much for the conversation. And if you've been watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you heard will bring you back to a future episode. Previous episodes of this podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. Please watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page, and join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting and becoming a subscriber on LinkedIn. So until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.